Hi, everyone. Welcome to Taking the Edge Off the Middle East, where we have casual conversations offering up insider knowledge on the most important events in the broader Middle East and why it all matters to America today. I'm Brian Katulis. I'm host of the program. I'm a senior fellow here at the Middle East Institute, and we're back at the beautiful Oman Library here at the campus of the Middle East Institute. If you're a returning listener, welcome back. If you're a first-time listener, we're happy you've decided to join us. Please rate, review, or send comments on what you're hearing. We value your feedback. Taking the Edge Off the Middle East loosens up things a bit and tries to bring in some new life and energy, the human side of conversations about the Middle East and U.S. policy towards the region. What we aim to do is offer a informal, candid, but respectful forum for an exchange of views. This week, I'm really excited to have a good friend of MEI and a good friend of mine, Holly Dagres, who is a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, where her work focuses on Iran. Holly also curates The Iranist, a widely read newsletter, a weekly newsletter on Iran, which you should sign up for. It's really great. It clues you in on what's going on inside of Iran. Holly is the third guest in a row we've had on Taking the Edge Off the Middle East to talk about Iran. The previous episode, we had Imad Sharji and Behnam bin Taleblu before him in our first two episodes of 2026. The reason I have Holly on today is that she's been working essentially her whole professional life centering the people of Iran, especially the next generation, the youth, in our policy debates. Holly lived in Iran in her younger years, growing up there as a teenager. So she's walked the walk and now talks the talk. She knows what's going on with the people of Iran, especially those fighting for a better future. So we hope you enjoy this episode. Holly, welcome to the beautiful Oman Library here at the Middle East Institute. Let's take some edge off the Middle East.
Salamati.
Salamati? Did I say it right?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. So let's just get into the basics. Holly, how is that a Persian name? Tell me, how does someone who is from Iran and grew up there for part of your youth, how do you become a Holly?
I get asked that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Because I would say every single Iranian I meet says, "What's your Iranian name?"
Yeah.
And then I have to explain, no, it's not Hale or Hani, it's Holly. And they look at me really perplexed and they say, "No,
You're right.
you're lying." And I'm like, no, my Iranian immigrant mother named me after a model presenter on The Price is Right.
Wow, Bob Barker. I remember watching that at 11 a.m. on snow days and things like that.
And I also grew up watching that sometimes if I was homesick from school.
So you were born where?
I was born in Los Angeles, also known as Tehran, the diaspora capital.
Yeah, and then you went back to Tehran. When and why?
1999, February 1999. And it was because my parents had divorced by then, had remarried a fellow Iranian, and they decided we should move back to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
So how old were you then?
I was just turning 13.
Oh my gosh. So you're moving in the middle of a school year at 13?
Yes. And I still remember very well just crying so much on the flight. My face was stuck to the window and it was fogged up, and I was a mess because
yeah, of course. I mean, it's so traumatic. So obviously there are no direct flights from Los Angeles. How do you go through?
So at that time I was flying through London.
Okay.
And then of course once you get off at London or Heathrow, we had to put on mandatory hijab to board an Iran Air flight to Tehran.
And your mom just had that on hand, or
We had to improvise.
Okay.
And so by then we had spent the summer in Tehran just about 6 months prior.
Right.
And so we had the right things already on hand to get ready for that move.
Yeah. So I know this is basic, but please explain mandatory hijab, because we have a lot of listeners who are younger. They see the images, but is it really? Was it against the law, and are there consequences and things like this? I know it sounds like a dumb question.
Yes, it's been against the law since the 79 revolution.
Right.
And it was really a shock for Iranian women. Actually, on March 8th, 1979, I believe it was, on International Women's Day,
Right.
Iranian women actually took to the streets to protest mandatory hijab. And so it became commonplace. And when I was there at the time in 1999, just a sliver of hair would get you in trouble. And I was a little girl, so I was as tall as I am now, so I really stood out like a sore thumb. I'm
Right.
about 5'10".
Yeah.
And so I was being told, like, be careful, the morality police will get you. And, going from sunny Southern California where you're wearing shorts and tank tops to this repressive, living under this repressive regime was a complete 180. And so, but interestingly, over time, women started showing more and more hair. It didn't mean that they were removing it, but I remember as even in my teenage years saying to myself, like, by the way this is going, inch by inch back, and again, not knowing full well that they could be arrested or, in the case of Mahsa Jina Amini, killed,
Right.
that they were still pushing back against this. And of course, now in recent months, I would say since the 12-day war, there's been these extraordinary images out of Iran of young Iranian women across the country violating mandatory hijab rules. And the regime is just overwhelmed by the numbers
of people who are coming out. Yeah. And we're going to get deep into that in the moment that Iran is facing right now and the uncertainty in U.S. policy. And then your important work on the next generation. And I've been telling you to write a book about it. Let's go back to 1999, though. You get on the plane in London, and just tell us, what was it like when you landed and going through? Can you remember? I mean, maybe this is just too difficult or traumatic, and if you don't want to talk about it, that's cool. But
I mean, I do remember always the first thing, because I've been terrible with hijab. Like I had bangs.
When I first met you wearing
I had bangs much of my life, and so trying to stick that into a headscarf was always a complication of mine.
Yeah.
That was the first thing I remember being told every time I got off the plane was hijab to go and, like, fix your hijab.
Right.
And that was one of the things. And as time went on, it's interesting because I'm actually not an Iranian citizen, so they don't grant citizenship to children born to foreign fathers.
Okay.
So I lived in Iran with a visa. And after the global war on terror happened, there was this push by the George W. Bush administration at the time that every foreign national would have to get fingerprinted at the airport in the U.S.
Right.
And so the regime started reciprocating that inside Iran. And so every time I'd enter the country from vacation or wherever, I would have my hands, like, stuck in ink that wouldn't come off for days. And so I'd leave the airport with these blue tip fingers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that sort of marks you and things like this.
Yeah.
So how different? So you're a teenager in LA, and then you go to Tehran, and you go to what school? What's the school?
I went to a school by the name of Tehran International School, and it was run by the Iranian Education Ministry, so run by the Iranian government. So we were in full, what we call manteau marne, which is school uniform.
Okay. What was that?
It's like a different kind of headscarf.
Right.
And then I would say a uniform that's like long from head to toe. And it's something that all Iranian schoolgirls wear.
Yeah.
And so that's what I had to wear. But of course, being our school, they were a little more lenient in rules because there had the children of diplomats and ambassadors in our
This was more of an elite inside of people who had privileged positions in government. So you get there. So the Islamic Revolution was in 1979. You get there 20 years, more or less, after. What were the teenagers like? Were they completely alien to you in terms of what they liked and what they listened to and how they, what they wanted compared to what you knew in LA? Or was it just, how was it different? How was it the same?
So, funny enough, satellite dishes, which were illegal and still are, were becoming prolific. And so at the time, there were maybe a few satellite channels. MTV India was one of them.
Right.
And it was through these satellite channels that Iranians started becoming more and more aware of, like, Western pop culture, music, and movies. And of course, we had this guy that would come with actually a briefcase. They called him a filmi, a movie man. And he'd come with these, like, VHSs that were basically illegal, but also they were ripped off of somebody had filmed a movie in Southeast Asia.
Like sat in a movie theater?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we were getting the latest movies in Iran, but you would see people getting up or coughing. I remember. And then eventually they moved from VHS to DVD. And I remember, like, on a friend's computer with the utmost excitement watching the first Harry Potter movie.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But of course, it was such a bad copy because there was people actually sitting in the theater and you're watching it with them on the small computer screen in my friend's house. But for us, it was the most exciting thing ever because finally we get to see the world of Harry Potter come to life on screen.
Yeah. Well, one of the images, I grew up in central Pennsylvania, and I'm a bit older than you. I don't know if you've noticed that. Just a little. But I remember the '79 revolution. I was a young boy and watching ABC News Nightline and the hostage crisis and things like this. But the images of a lot of Americans for the last 40 years plus is these rallies where they say "Death to America," and people like. Did you see that and experience that sort of thing? And is it where most Iranians are, or what's the sentiment towards Americans when you were living over there?
So, it's funny. I remember very well when I first moved there, state media would show a lot of imagery of that. And right around when I had moved, it was actually the anniversary of the 1979 revolution, which was this week. And they would air that footage of all these American flags being burned and then chanting "Mag Bar America" or "Death to America." And I remember being so appalled and being like, this is awful. Why are they doing that? And
Right.
because nobody really gave me Iran 101.
Uh-huh.
Or explain like why this country had gone from being ruled by a crown to a turban. But I have to say, through the 7.5 years I was there, I never actually saw it. And anytime people heard that I was American, I was treated with the utmost kindness. And then they would tell me that they like America.
Right. So, and you were there, you would have been like 15 when the 9/11 attacks happened. And what was that like? What explains that?
Well, my experience was rather extraordinary because I was spending the afternoon at an Iranian Jewish family that had adopted us, basically. And we had subletted an apartment from them about, I would say, 6 months prior, and they had invited us over for dinner. And sure enough, by the time we got there, the first tower had been hit.
Yeah.
We were all glued to satellite news trying to figure out what was happening. And I'll never forget that when the second tower was hit, and then, of course, when both fell, I remember this moment of silence we all had in the room. Everybody was praying in their respective religion.
Right.
For the dead. And of course, famously, I think within days, if not the next day, Iranians in a square in Tehran had a candlelight visual to honor the lives that were lost on 9/11. And this was, I would say, probably the only country in the Middle East doing it.
Yeah. And that, I mean, your sense was that was heartfelt, that was widespread, and there's an attraction there. People say that Iranians are much more pro-American. I don't know if that was your experience. I mean, you were there in your teens. You basically were there from when you were 13 until you were in 20. Yeah, 20 or so. Wow, we're going to get into that. If you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I got a teenager, as you know. And what an exciting time. But back to the big political sort of geostrategic, that's a moment where there's this outpouring of sympathy. And then the Iraq War happened, the Afghanistan War, then the Iraq War, and then Axis of Evil, right? And I don't know if you were tracking all of this because
I was actually.
Yeah.
And that's what made me go into this career that I'm now in.
Okay.
So I was impacted at such a young age.
Yeah.
I think some of my classmates found me annoying because I was such a social justice warrior.
Yeah.
Even in my early teens. That's why I feel like I resonate more with Gen Z because they're so much more politically active than millennials at the time.
And why do you think that is?
Well, we can get into it, but basically it's because I don't think that Gen Z feels that they have their hold on their future with climate change and the way the world's going.
Right. Yeah. And that's the experience we're going to get into it as well inside of Iran.
Yeah.
They want something different, but they feel like the old systems have not responded to what their concerns are. And there's not as much hope in their future, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because as I mentioned, I'm a different generation. As an American, I came of age at a time when America was quote unquote winning in the world. We'd won the Cold War. There was a quick war in the Middle East, the first Gulf War. All of these things were pretty. And then I had the experience of working in the Clinton administration and junior levels and things like this. Much different sentiment than where we are in 2026 after everything that we've traveled. But I was more hopeful. And I understand, like, also in this country, there's less hope. But in Iran, there's less hope. But it's mostly, what's the sentiment? Like, let's go back to, like, your classmates back then in the 2000s. What was it like, and what did they want different from what they had?
Well, I think my classmates wouldn't be the best cohort to look at because a lot of them were elites or they had dual nationalities. But I would say that Iran was in a different space at the time. There was a reformist movement under Mohammad Khatami, and so there was actually a sense of hope for change. And of course, slowly but surely, there was a reality check. There was a student uprising in 1999 that was crushed brutally.
Right.
And there was this realization that reforms could only be limited can only be done in so much and so many different ways. And of course, Iranians would go to the ballot box over and over again. Most famously, they elected moderate President Hassan Rouhani in 2013 because they wanted Iran to do some sort of deal with the West, which became the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
Right.
They wanted the international sanctions removed. They wanted to be brought out from the cold and to be part of the Western world or just the international community as a whole, because these multilateral sanctions that were imposed because of the controversial nuclear program really prohibited that. But now we're in a place where that Iranians have tried everything. They've tried reform at the ballot box. They've tried to ask for change in very subtle ways, and they've come to the realization that reform has been dead for a really long time. And it's not just me saying this here as an analyst in Washington, but you've had foremost activists in the country like Bahadur Hedayat, who's a reformist activist, and Nobel laureate Narges Mohammadi. And so this realization that at the core of their issues is the Islamic Republic itself, with its systemic mismanagement, corruption, and repression. And that's why there's been an explicit call for the past few years, I would say since December 2017, January 2018 onwards, with protests for the ouster of the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, we're really going to get into that. But let's go back to your teenage years. Is that cool?
Sure.
Yeah. So the rumor on the street is that you had pink hair. I found out that that's not true. Right? Like it was red, fuchsia. What were the colors? So
it was everything.
Red, teal, and fuchsia. Why? Like, so what, did you have it going there, or what was going on? And tell us socially. Just tell us what it was like being a kid, not a kid, but a teenager in the 2000s in Iran.
Yeah. So at first we have to contextualize. I'm a Western privileged Iranian American in Tehran. So the average kid at that time wasn't walking around with pink hair, but I was. But if you look at Gen Z now, like I said, I probably fit more into that. So
the idea when you're lead, right? Like that's it. You were the trendsetter.
Yeah. So I had them in different phases. I had fuchsia and I had blue, and then I had red. And I famously got in trouble in school. And I remember the vice principal was giving me a hard time and said I need to go dye my hair.
Oh, wow. Uh-huh.
And I decided I was just going to dodge her moving ahead and just like avoid walking by her office.
So you were sort of an exceptional case.
I was, and I think it was because I was a really good student, and I stood out in my mannerisms and how I treated other students and teachers in the school.
Yeah, what were they teaching you?
Well, we had a British school curriculum, and our school books were British, but they were actually photocopied. So we all had these photocopied books, and we would like highlight them and write all over them. And then every now and then, if you got a lucky textbook, we would doodle on them and write problematic things.
What problematic things?
I honestly can't remember, but sometimes it was like, it wouldn't be anti-regime, but we'd make silly comments, just doodles that kids would do in high school and middle school here.
Sorry for the dumb questions. I'm full of them, right? Is it gender segregated?
It is, yes. It's an all-girls school, and the boys' school was in a neighborhood. We were in Sharq in the west, and then in Sadat, a little further east, was the boys' school. So after school, the boys would come to our school to hit on the girls and vice versa.
Nice.
Yeah.
How did they hit on you?
Who
didn't?
It was more that they would stand and loiter. And if anybody had the guts to say anything, they would say something, or then maybe get your social media account. Back then it was MSN Messenger. And
really?
Their email and start chatting you up.
That's right. So did you have a high school sweetheart?
I did.
Who was he?
He was a fellow halfie because I'm half. He was German-Iranian.
Yeah.
And he went to the German school that was run by the German government or German embassy.
How'd you meet?
We met at a house party, an underground house
Wait, they
party.
had parties over there? Wait, hold on. Yeah. And we're drinking some Iranian beer, right? So
yeah.
Back home beer.
Yes.
But so they actually have parties over there, right? Despite
Yes. I mean, I would say Iranians always have been living, but it's been behind closed doors. And so they're always having parties, and there are instances when the police do show up and you get in trouble. If you're lucky, you can buy them off, but that's just been part of the culture that Iranians have gatherings at their homes. And so
the
young people of my generation and today still do that.
Well, it just predates even Islam, right? I mean, it's a great heritage, and the wine, and like, it just goes back forever. And we're going to get to the hopes that you have for change
Sure.
out of Iran.
Sure.
But it's in some ways maybe going back to its history that wasn't so constrained by a militant extremism. So we're going to talk about the current day, but back then, did you have any classmates or others, family members that were victims of the Islamic Republic regime's sort of repression and terror on its own people?
So, asking that question, I think about a woman named Mariam that I met when I was growing up in Los Angeles. And her story really stands out to me because I think she was the first example of the regime's brutality. Her father was a general in the Shah's army, and he was executed after the 1979 revolution. And Mariam was a high schooler, and she supposedly, out of frustration for what happened to her father, had written Makbar Khomeini, death to Khomeini, on a school wall or a blackboard. And that same day, they came for her. They came for her and they imprisoned this teenage girl. And this was like in the early 80s.
Right.
And so I of course, she was later released, and I met her when I was a little girl. But her arms were pockmarked with cigarette burns from the torture. And I even remember my mom saying the reason she was cross-eyed was because of the torture she had endured in prison. And so she was, I would say, the first victim I encountered at such a young age.
Yeah. And that was even before you got there, right?
Yeah.
Well before. Did this continue because it was a reform era? Did things loosen up and ease up? I mean, explain to ordinary Americans too who listen to this, that basically the system is people vote and they can vote, but there's constraints on what those people who get elected can do, right? Because there's one big power, right?
Yeah. So in elections in Iran are neither free nor fair. The supreme leader, I would say, arguably is the ultimate decider through something called the Guardian Council. And he handpicks 6 of those individuals out of the 12. And it's those guys that get to bet who gets to run for president.
Right.
And so in many ways, the elections through this manner are rigged. And, you know, Larry Diamond, who's a prominent political scientist, I think he categorizes Iran as I think it was authoritarian democracy. And so
it's not free.
It's definitely not free. Sure. And so Iranians in some ways know how to vote, like participate in an election, but are they getting the outcome that a free country like the United States are? Definitely not. They're limited in their abilities. And that's why we increasingly see them not participate in elections.
Yeah. We're going to jump to the current day in a second. But did you feel like in your teenage years you missed out on anything? Because you had a unique experience. You've, as I've said, walked the walk, you talked the talk of what it was like growing up in Iran. But do you feel like you missed something by being over there? You gained a lot in different perspective. We see it in your work. But what do you think was missing in your teenage years?
I mean, at that time, I thought the worst experience of my life was moving to Iran. And I talked about crying there. Probably those first 6 months, there wasn't a day I didn't cry.
Right.
To the point where the principal had to call my mom in and say, what's going on with her?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember famously a classmate, or I think it was on the school bus, a student trying to console me and be like, you know, if you think Iran's bad, you should look at Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia. Like, that was like the better option. Like, Iran was better than Afghanistan, right. Saudi Arabia. And so that was kind of what I dealt with. But, you know, at that time, I thought like the worst thing had happened to me was by moving here. But then I, of course, got more involved with day-to-day life in Iran and met just extraordinary people. And I learned so much, and I was a curious kid. I had so many questions, and I one of my mom's friends' sister was a guide at the Tehran Carpet Museum, and she actually went out of her way to take me to all the museums in Tehran and educate me, and it was through her and my many questions that I asked of ordinary people that I started to learn about the country. But, you know, it still felt like as a teenager, there were things I was missing out. Yes, we talked about my high school sweetheart, but that was years down the road.
Yeah.
But for me, like, I never got to go to a pop concert. I missed out on like Britney Spears and Backstreet Boys.
Yeah.
I missed out on prom.
You didn't miss out much. No,
But you know what? When you're when you're 13, 14, 15, those are like the moments in your life. And then, of course, not being able to freely express myself and what I wear, and not being able to just go to the movies on a Friday night with my friends.
Yeah, the sort of freedom you have in an open society
And I know-
ours, and like just go out and have fun, because you were talking about underground parties,
Yeah.
things where, okay, if somebody comes and not crashes, but authorities come in, you get into real trouble, right?
Absolutely. But I have to say, despite these hurdles, it's created like a beautiful and talented society where people are, they're focused on their arts, on
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
their photography and
Movies, right?
the movies.
Yeah.
And so like they've lost so much to be able to have a free society, but that beauty comes out in different ways. And so I remember one of my family friends' kids, he was a 13-year-old, and he was building blog websites, a Linkin Park Persian language fan page and a Harry Potter fan page.
Yeah.
He was a 13-year-old web designer.
That's amazing. So, yeah.
And so like that was what kids were doing with their spare time, and that's why they're such an extraordinary group of people, because they have so much talent and so much human capital to offer the world. And it's such a shame that they have to live under this clerical establishment.
Yeah, I agree. And I have a dream. And actually, in the room with us, we're recording this in the beautiful Oman Library. But my dear friend and colleague, Alex Vatanka, is sitting over there. Yeah. And he knows that I bug him all the time, is that I want to go to Iran, to a free Iran, and to experience the rich culture, right? Like, I've lived in the Middle East for about 3, 4, 5 years. In Palestine, Egypt, Jordan, places like this. I've never been to Iran, and this is a selfish thing. I want to see it, because it's such a rich heritage and history, and not just what we've experienced in our lifetimes, which is fraught with a lot of war and terror and oppression. And I hope we'll talk more about this. Let's jump to the current day. Paint us a picture of Iran today. Just let's right size it. How many people are there?
91 million.
And how many people do you think have left in the last few decades? Is there any good estimate?
It's a little confusing, the numbers. It seems
It's
like
never
between
different.
4 to 6 million
Uh-huh.
Iranians live abroad.
Yeah.
Depending on where you look.
And is it who gets out? It's mostly the elite that are connected to they have economic and educational opportunity.
Not necessarily. Some of them are refugees, political refugees, and they're spread across the world. And I know this because of the kids that went to my school. I've met half Iranians from Indonesia, from Japan,
Yeah.
from El Salvador.
Yeah.
Like places you wouldn't think Iranians exist.
They're all around the world. And
Yeah.
those who remain, what's the basic guesstimate of how young the population is, like under the age of 25 or 30?
Under the age of 30, it's about 50 million, they're saying these days.
Oh, so that's more than half.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Right.
it used to be 60, but those numbers keeps bigger. It's really, again, it's hard to measure these days. It might be less than that, but that's what some of the reporting saying.
Yeah. So we're recording this in the first half of February. It'll come out just in a couple of days. Just to stipulate, just because there's a lot of uncertainty in our world, and we don't know what's going to happen with Iran. But take us to the current moment, because it's basically been about almost a month and a half since this latest round of protests have occurred. Is there a good estimate? I mean, it's so hard to tell. But people came out in the streets, and as I read it, President Trump and others encouraged them to come out in the streets. We've got your back, sort of issued a red line. But we're about a month and a half into this. What has happened inside of Iran?
Well, let's start with the numbers. So the group Human Rights Activists in Iran says that they've documented at least 6,500 that were killed. They're reviewing at least 11,000.
Yeah.
And there's been 52,000 arrests at least.
Mm-hmm.
The UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights, May Soto, said that those numbers could be in the more around 20,000 plus. And we've had 2 anonymous ministers affiliated with the health ministry say that it might be around the 30,000 range.
Wow.
And so just to give context, these numbers, even by the lowest of this, let's just go with the 6,500. These numbers are about half of that would be that were killed during the 1979 revolution. And Dr. Ali Ansari of St. Andrews University, a prominent Iranian historian, told me that, like we'd have to go back to the 1790s to find that level of violence.
Wow.
So centuries prior.
Yeah. It's hard to comprehend that. And it's because things like I've been in a bunch of meetings earlier today on Palestine and Gaza, what happened in Gaza. And we vividly have these impressions, right? And it only ekes out and drips and drabs is my impression. Tell me if I'm wrong, but there's not a full picture of what's happened here. I hear stories like this. First, that there's some semi-official television show that's a comedy show that's actually making inside of Iran that was making fun of the people who were more. Is that correct?
Basically, yeah, they had a multiple choice question of like where does the Islamic Republic keep the bodies?
Really?
And it just very, very much in poor taste and making fun because and just to give context for people that are listening in, I mean, there were so many bodies that they ran out of body bags. And Behesh Zahra, or Zahra's Paradise, which is Tehran's largest cemetery that houses over 1,000,000 graves, they were starting to give out reportedly free grave plots and actual burial shrouds. That's how many people were killed in Tehran alone. And they were saying that they were using ice cream trucks, and like meat freezers, whatever they could, just to move these bodies around. And they were just dumping them on the ground like lumps of meat, just in the most humiliating and dehumanizing way.
Right.
And treating these dead protesters. And then people were having to rummage through some of this. And what really broke me was this 12-minute video of this father, and he's filming a good 12 minutes. It's like a short documentary at this, I would say, forensic center of just walking body after body. And all he keeps saying is, "My dear son, Seper, where are you?"
Yeah.
And it just, I mean, I'm not a parent, but just as a human being, I think several people that I had shared this video online said I couldn't make it past the 2 minutes. That's how horrific it was.
It's awful. And is it just protesters and people in the streets, or are they going into places? Because again, in this era of truth decay, I don't know what's real or not, but I've heard stories that like even attacks in places of worship and mosques. I don't know if that's true or not, but like, do they go beyond just the people in the streets and go and grab people?
So the hospitals have been a big target. So historically, protesters try not to go to hospitals because they're worried about arrest. And so there were protesters that were going to hospitals, and according to reports, security forces were going in and shooting these people in the head.
In the hospital?
In the hospital. And then you would find these videos and pictures of with the body bags, they would have like medical devices still attached to them. And so just horrific things. And then it's just the level of horror that just happened. I mean, I keep talking about this is Iran's Syria 2011 moment. Like they've crossed a threshold of no return.
So when you lived there in your teens, I know this is a while back, but when you experienced the regime's forces, the IRGC and others, but like what drives someone to actually go into the hospital and shoot someone like that? Like what's the thing that makes them go do that to their fellow Iranian?
Well, first, this is an ideological regime, and so I think there's that element. But I think that the true believers of the Islamic Republic believe the rhetoric of the regime, that these are enemies of the state, that they're alleged CIA and Mossad agents. And if you've been watching people like Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, for example, they've been calling these protesters terrorists and ISIS, which is very much copy-paste of the Bashar al-Assad playbook.
Yeah, interesting.
And so when you're being told that, in your mind, you're like, these are the bad guys. I'm out, like, I need to do something to save my homeland, or else they're going to, in their own words, turn Iran into Syria. They keep talking about the quote-unquote Syriazation of Iran, which is this idea that the country will be fragmented and chopped up by Western powers, and that the country would descend into chaos, which is very ironic because, as you know so well, it was the IRGC Quds force that played a role very much in Syria and causing that to happen, to prop up the Assad regime.
Yeah, they fed that and fired that. But that's the thing. I mean, you lived in Egypt. I lived in Egypt as well. When the transition happened in 2011, when people came out in the streets, I heard that a lot of foreign powers are just trying to split us up.
The foreign hand.
The foreign hand, and it's the excuse. But what you're saying, based on your experience and everything that you know, it's ordinary Iranians who just want something different. They want freedom. What is different about this round of protests that broke out at the end of 25? Is it still ongoing in 20? Do you think?
I mean, this is the thing. This is a movement. This is an anti-regime movement. Just because you don't see mass people in the streets doesn't mean it's over. We just talked about the 79 revolution anniversary, but as the regime celebrated, there were people chanting "Death to the dictator" from the rooftops and windows, and there were some viral videos of that just yesterday.
So it's still ongoing.
It's still ongoing, and I say, like, okay, they've won this battle. They've won this battle through a communication shutdown and this unprecedented massacre, but they haven't won the war for Iran's future.
You have this thing, and everybody should listen to Holly's TED Talk. You can find it online, but I'm not going to get it right, but it's about grass and concrete.
Oh, yeah. I talked about Gen Z as, like, have you ever seen grass that's pushed through concrete? And I say that's Iranian Gen Z.
Yeah, that it's still seeking to go on despite all of this oppression. So what's different about these protests compared to what happened with Mahsa Amini? Is it more widespread? Is it outside of capital cities, or?
I would say that they have a lot of commonalities. First, the grievances are the same, so systemic mismanagement, corruption, and repression, and with this call for the ouster of the Islamic Republic. All 31 provinces participated in both. And so that one, I would say, was more women and girls led. This was across the board. And so, but I think their triggers were different. I would say Mahsa Amini having been murdered by the so-called morality police, that triggered women like freedom. This was the collapse of the Iranian real against the
economic factors that are hitting working class and everybody.
But overall, like, there's a core recognition for years now that the heart of these issues is the Islamic Republic, and it needs to go.
Yeah. What role do women play in this? Because I've seen some of the images, and I don't know if you know this about me, but like about 15, 20 years ago, I did research for Freedom House, if you know the organization. And I did projects in Morocco, Egypt, Kuwait, Iraq, and other places. And in it, one of the key questions we were asking ordinary people in all of these countries was the push for women's rights in some of these places. And to me, it was very electric. It was very powerful, because in these societies some were opening up quicker than others, some not at all, that the role of women, it was a source of power. Actually, people don't know this, that they actually are quite powerful in Middle Eastern societies. It's often seen as they're behind the scenes and repression, have to wear certain things. But what role are women playing now and now and in the future for Iran?
Well, first I should say, and I didn't say this earlier, is that the Islamic Republic is a gender apartheid state. So Iranian women are treated like second-class citizens.
And there's no diplomats that serve. There are no senior leaders.
I mean, no senior leaders. There are diplomats, but they're low level. But Iranian women can't be judges, for instance. Like Nobel laureate Shirin Ebadi was declined the opportunity to be a judge, even though she was under the Shah.
Right.
And so they're not given the same rights as men. And there has been a big push for, I would say, decades now. But Iranian women have played a key role in Iranian history. You can go as far back as the 1800s, for example. Iranian women actually in the harem of Nasruddin Shah actually were part of a tobacco protest at the time.
Yeah.
And so you could see throughout Iranian history, and of course, famously in the early 2000s, in 2006, there was a 1 million women signature campaign to push back against the discriminatory laws against women. And I like to call Iranian women Shirzan, or lionesses, and it's a very common way of describing Iranian women because they're extraordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the way that they've been pushing back against authority for decades, but more so recently in these very visual ways when they're violating mandatory hijab rules.
Right. So we're going to get to U.S. policy in a second. I want to ask you about this latest round of protests and how you perceive the broader international community, if there is an international community today, given how divided the world is. How is it responding? Has there been even a sufficient response? And sort of put the U.S. and the Trump administration to the side, because we're really going to get into it. Or is there any sort of outcry? Is there any even notion of support for the Iranian people? Or is Or is it mostly still centered on the so-called geostrategic questions of the nuclear program and ballistic missiles and things like this? Has anything meaningful been voiced by the international community about what's going on inside of Iran the last month and a half?
Well, I mean, I know you like to give report cards, so I feel like I should give them a C,
That
maybe even a
average?
yeah.
How has it been average?
It's been average because we're getting the equivalence of thoughts and prayers from the international community. So statements of condemnation, but no, not really much action. The best we saw was that the European Union, after years, designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
But I mean, there hasn't been much done, and even in this moment, they should be withdrawing their ambassadors.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, if that's a step that the people should do.
I mean, absolutely. Why is it that when there's a fatwa against Salman Rushdie in the 80s that European countries can withdraw their ambassadors, or after the assassination at a restaurant in Germany in the 90s that they withdraw their ambassadors, but a massacre on this level?
But why is that? Like, answer your own question there. Like, why do you think does the European Union or European countries just become enamored with this notion of we got to engage with diplomacy with the regime, and this has not been a priority, or what is it?
I think that's part of it, definitely. I think there's also skepticism from the international community. I don't think, and I wrote this in my New York Times piece, is that there's been skepticism in Western governments for a long time that change is coming. But whether they like it or not, it's coming. It's up to the international community to decide if they want it to be blood or without, essentially. And I say this because this is exactly what happened to Syria. There was inconsistency on policy, and I think that a lot less bloodshed could have happened if the international community was much more consistent. And I'll throw the Trump administration into that box.
Right, yeah. So let's use that as a segue to get into the response of the U.S. and U.S. policy planning and things like this, the things I love most. And you and I have talked about this personally, not on my podcast, but we're going to talk about it right now, is that there's, like, let me just get on a soapbox a little bit. I'm in the belief that on U.S. policy in the Middle East, U.S. foreign policy, we need a mindset change that actually elevates the people of these countries, whether it's Iran or Palestine or Egypt and other places. And I know you believe that as well. And we've talked about various projects that you and I have been involved with. I'm not going to name them, that privilege the so-called strategic questions. And I get it. They're important. You don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Their ballistic missiles are a threat to everyone. Their support for the regime's support for terror is very dangerous. But the Islamic Republic of Iran is at war with its own people. And you know this. So the first question is, where can America, and I go, let's just say generally, like, because I think the Trump 2.0 administration is peculiar in its own way, but where could America and outsiders actually could practically give better support to the Iranian people in their struggle for freedom? And we want to get into why we're reticent about it. And I think it touches upon military action, which I don't really want to talk about. I want to talk about the sort of so-called soft elements of the support that's not there. And what we were talking about with the European countries. What more could we do from the outside to support the Iranian people in their struggle?
Well, I think for starters, the State Department cutting funding just about a year ago to internet freedom and human rights organizations, both which have been integral to the fight for freedom in Iran. They're the vanguards, the human rights organizations that focus on Iran. They're documenting those abuses. They're using that as an accountability tool against the regime. The internet freedom organizations like Siphon that are providing VPNs to Iranians, the State Department used to provide 30% of those. And just to keep in mind, 35% of the world's most popular websites are blocked in Iran. So these VPNs are integral for Iranians getting online.
So this was cut in the first year of the Trump administration. But would you say the Biden team, especially after 2022 and Mahsa Amini's death, did they do enough to plus up those efforts and prioritize it? Honestly, no. Just
I think there was always room for improvement on both fronts. I will always have criticisms. I think like one of the big mistakes was that at the time, the special envoy focused purely on the nuclear deal. And it was only until Women Life Freedom happened that something called a GL2 license was actually after over a decade was actually put it like updated during Women Life Freedom. Apparently they had to pull people in from their holidays to actually update this license. So
but this was, sorry, I'm going to be tougher than you are on my friends in the Biden administration.
Sure.
I think, and I said this in another seminar I had to do today, in the fall of 2022, there was a missed opportunity. And the missed opportunity was this. Everybody knew by then, longer and stronger on a nuclear deal was not going to happen. It was not in the cards. And for whatever reason, the shifts inside of Iran, I don't know if you agree with that, but they weren't going to get to a new, like the notion that you go back to a JCPOA, easy and simple, was you could have written that off. The death of Masa Amini, but the rise of the protests, that was one.
Sure.
Should have led to a strategic rethink. Second was Iran's active support for Russia's war in Ukraine. We're backing Ukraine and trying to stop the plays that Russia is running on Ukraine and the invasion, and Iran is helping them.
Sure.
And disagree with me, but I did not see a grand rethink. And I was asked the question of where are the Democrats today on Iran? And I said they probably are where they are in the second half of the Biden administration, in a reactive, tactical crisis management, but they don't have a vision. And that vision certainly doesn't include the people of Iran in a sincere way, and not the next generation.
Well, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that's the problem, is that they were so stuck on this idea, I would say like the JCPOA cult, basically, that they needed to get back to the original deal, and that they couldn't accept that maybe we needed to rebuild, that we needed to approach Iran differently, especially in terms of the protests. Like, Iran will never go back to the way it was after Women Life Freedom. And of course, with this massacre, it's crossed this threshold, as I said, of no return. And
right.
Yet here we are in this moment still talking about the idea of negotiating over a nuclear deal.
Right.
And I don't understand what it's going to take for Republican or Democratic administrations to realize that this regime should not be negotiated with, and that
you can't trust it, and because of how it deals with
its own people.
Its own people. Yeah.
Like, they're basically being held hostage, and we're saying, oh, you know what? You should deal with it. Deal with this regime. We'd rather have the status quo. We'd rather keep the oil markets okay and make sure other regional vision projects not be tampered with, but you guys should live under this repressive regime.
How you respond to this charge, I get it sometimes, is, oh, you just want another war like Iraq 2003, and you want regime change in this way that was so costly to America. I'd love to hear a response on it. I have my own response, and I don't want to get into military options and things like this. My part of my response is all those things that we cut and all those things that we could do with partners in the free world to actually help Iran. People forget the lessons we should have learned from how we defeated the Soviet Union in the Cold War. And it was through connectivity and building ties with people who wanted something different. That was a short-lived victory because how Russia went in that direction. But how do you respond to that charge? The knee-jerk, it's not just a left or right thing, but that you just want another war because you're critical of this regime and you want the Iranian people to stand.
Well, I think first it's so ridiculous for anybody to say that to me, because I literally grew up in the global war on terror with Tehran as a perch to wars in neighboring countries,
Yeah.
and literally why I went into this career. I never thought we would have a 12-day war or be in this moment. So I'm certainly not I find that just horrendous that people want to throw the word warmonger anytime anybody brings up the Iranian people. And that's what's so horrifying, is that people are saying if we bring up the massacre numbers, we're actually justifying a war.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, I mean, why are we denying what the Iranian people want, which is what people everywhere want, which is change, positive change. They want to be able to take a hold of their own futures. And that's a question I have for those people. Why is it that the Iranians can't have that? Why is it that everybody needs to talk about war? Like, for example, building off-ramps for defections.
Uh-huh.
That's a really simple way that doesn't cause war. Like, there's so many non-kinetic actions that people can take. Calling for a democratic transition. Is that war? No.
But we're sending Iranians back who right? Like
I actually
these.
wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, I
I
want to
mean,
ask.
yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's complicated because here are these Iranians that have been fleeing for years, and then we're sending some of them back. Some of them allegedly have controversial backgrounds
Right.
and ties to the regime, so I can't speak to that.
Yeah.
But some of them are also women life freedom protesters or religious minorities, and so I think that like the Iran policy is all over the place, if we can even call it such at
Right.
this moment. And I've seen this with the Biden administration too. There's inconsistencies there as well. So I think there really needs to be a deep rethink on how we want to approach Iran. And I think it starts with putting the people at the front and center of these conversations. And they haven't been there at all for the most part.
So let's go to an imaginary space where you're queen for a day on U.S. policy on Iran. And what would you concretely do? Because we haven't talked as much as I wanted to about your work on the next generation.
Maybe we should do that. Like,
Yeah.
not be so policy heavy.
No. But we can do both.
Okay.
How does America? I know right now it's tough because we're sitting at the knife's edge of maybe we'll have a war option or some sort of diplomatic deal. That if Trump goes in that direction, who knows? Well, we really don't know.
Sure.
But first, how do we as Americans and American society connect with that center of gravity that you said 50 million or so youth, that we don't turn them against us, but actually we think in the way that some people thought strategically for decades in America about how we bring about a change that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain and all of these other things that sustains itself mostly except for Russia, right?
Sure.
How do you, beyond sort of the tactical things of what we could do in an emergency situation, what are the things we weren't doing under Obama or Trump 1 or Biden and now Trump 2 to build greater connectivity to that young generation?
I mean, I'm going to just pack some non-kinetic measures that this current administration should take.
Right.
One, I think there should be more push from our end to push our Western allies in Iran to withdraw their ambassadors for the obvious reasons.
Sure.
I think they should be turning on money again, funding for internet freedom and human rights organizations. We just saw a piece in the Wall Street Journal about allegedly 6,000 Starlink terminals being smuggled into the country. I think they should turn that up a bit. And they should also turn on direct to cell, which is that phones that are 2020 onwards get to connect to Starlink. Other things they should do, more importantly, is it shouldn't be business as usual with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And things can't go back to the way it was. And I think that there should be continued condemnation as the massacre has ended. But the Iranians that have been impacted by it, the families of slain protesters or those that have families in prison or on death row, they're just having to live this day in and day out. And so that should not be ignored. But more importantly, and we didn't talk much about this, is this call for democratic transition that activists inside the country, but also former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has been pushing for. And he has offered himself as a transitional leader and has real call from the streets, since we saw during this recent anti-regime uprising. And so we should be paying attention to the Iranian people first and foremost. And we've not done that. We've not centered our policy for the past few decades around the Iranian people. And I think now is the time to do that.
Yeah, I fundamentally agree with you. But honestly, I don't see this U.S. administration doing that. Like, I think the struggle, this is my view, and you're more of an Iran expert, Alex is as well, is that this is probably a medium to long-term struggle, no matter what Trump does in 2026. And I hope I'm wrong. It won't actually lead to a huge flourishing of that freedom and democracy, that this will take years. And it's something that, again, we're so conditioned because of Iraq and Afghanistan and 20 years of military occupation in those places, of thinking that, oh, that's the only tool that we have. But what you're saying and what I'm trying to articulate is that there are other tools that actually empower people to own this themselves. And it's going to be a tough fight. And as we saw in Syria, which I don't think the Syrian case is even clear to this day, right? It's better than it was under Assad.
Sure.
But it's a strong struggle. But what we're missing, and why I'm skeptical in 2026 in Trump 2.0, is the downgrading of human rights and democracy as a priority, if it was ever a priority in the Middle East. for the U.S., for Democrat or Republican. I think it's still a key thing, but it should be for our values and for our interests in the long run. But that's why I think a longer game is necessary, because I'm skeptical of these pieces that you and I, if Biden didn't do it as strongly, I don't think it's going to happen under President Trump, I'm sad to say.
I mean, I'm with you. And one of the big things I've always said was that Trump just wants a 2-page paper like the North Korea deal, and he would be satisfied with that. And that's really one of the
biggest... Wait, there was a North Korea deal? I didn't hear that. What?
Well, remember there was that meaningless 2-page paper in Trump 1.0. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, that's the deal, the kind of deal Trump would be willing to make just to say he made a better deal because it was his JCPOA.
Yeah.
And that's really worrisome because right now, Iranians are waiting for bated breath to see if they're going to be thrown under the bus right now. This was a president that told people that his help was on the way and to take over your institutions. And they went out to the streets. And at the time, before the communications shutdown that resulted in the unprecedented massacre, people were thanking the president from videos I'd seen.
Right.
And even changing street names. And now they're worried that he's going to make a deal with the people that slaughtered them.
Right. Yeah. I think that's one possibility. I think another scenario is that he conducts some form of strikes akin to what he did against the Houthis last year in Yemen, and that it does degrade some capabilities of the regime. But and others who know Iran really well, is that it takes a lot more than just symbolic hits to really fundamentally lead to change. I'm not in favor of that, right? And I don't think you are either. But I don't think we have it in our focus and attention to actually the uphill struggle and battle that the people face. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think Donald Trump is going to actually bring them much happiness and success.
I think we're going to have to wait and see what happens. The one thing I learned is that we're in the post-October 7th world where nothing makes sense and anything's possible. All the events since October 7th have suggested that if anybody had predicted the fall of Bashar al-Assad, I think they would have lost their job and they would have been called crazy before it happened.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask one last question on this and then do a wrap-up thing because we're running out of time. But I want you to imagine that this podcast somehow is broadcast to some of your former classmates in Tehran. And I don't know who they were, but someone who you trusted and really liked. I don't know if you're in touch with people. I don't know if you're in touch with your ex-boyfriend or your sweetheart and things like this. But people who are there, who are struggling. And I know it was a certain elite that was there, but people, what would you say to the next generation? If not your classmates, I'm sorry, I'm jumbling different things. Classmates, but then the next generation as well. What would you say to them? What do you think they need to hear from you?
Well, I wouldn't say it to my classmates, but I would say it to the Iranian people that I'm sorry that you're suffering, that you've had to suffer for 47 years, and that the international community, despite all the efforts you've made and been so brave, that they're not heeding to your calls. And it breaks my heart, not just as somebody of Iranian heritage, but somebody that knows you so well as a people and how extraordinary you are. And that you've had to live under this dark cover of this regime and people don't get to see your full potential.
Yeah. Yeah, I really support that. If I could add to it, what I would say is just don't give up hope.
That too.
No. In these struggles, sometimes when they're their darkest, can take a turn in ways that human history is sort of so unpredictable. And I think the thing that we need to remember and what we talked about here is not only your own story and where the Iranian people and why the Iranian people are so central to this challenge right now. It's not simply about ballistic missiles and nuclear program and what it does around the region. But it is remembering that the vast majority of those people don't like what they're living under right now, right?
Especially Iranian Gen Z. I mean, these are the first generation that have been born with internet and social media at their fingertips, albeit they had circumvention tools to get online. And they have the same needs and wants. They dress like your son.
Yeah.
They like the same music as your son. They
that
probably
would like to meet some of the girls, right?
They even probably use the same lingo that you and I probably don't understand.
Yeah.
And they want to be part of the world that everybody else is living. And they have so much potential, and they just don't get to live it. And that's why they've been taking to the streets over and over again. Arguably, they are the first of Gen Z to actually lead anti-regime protests around the globe that have become commonplace in countries like Madagascar and Bangladesh.
Yeah.
And they started that with Women Like Freedom in 2022. And people, and it's extraordinary that these kids, like, knowing full well they'll be killed, are going out there because that's what they want. They want a normal life, Zendia normal, as they say.
Yeah, and as you said in your TED Talk, that this is like the grass that's pushing up against the concrete, that this is not going away. And
they're going to be
lead
successful.
to an end of a happy story there. Last question to you.
Okay.
You alluded to this. How'd you get into this line of work? I know it takes you back to Tehran. What was the original spark, though?
Actually, 9/11.
How so?
Well, I mean, I had to live on that perch of being in Tehran and seeing the global war on terror unfold. Maybe I'm sure you remember this better than me because you were in the middle of all of it in here in DC. But there was a time when Iran was going to be the third country.
Yeah.
And like around 2006 onwards. And so by the time I moved back to the U.S., I knew I wanted to study international relations, but I was shocked that after so many years after 9/11, we still didn't understand the Middle East as a country. And so I took so many courses on the Middle East. And by the time I graduated UCLA, the Arab Spring kicked off and I wanted to be a Middle East analyst. So I moved to Cairo because of the Arab Spring.
Yeah.
But even then, I didn't realize I was going to be an Iran analyst. It was actually all the Egyptians I met that asked me really strange questions about Iran that I realized, wow, Americans, we might think have it bad, but even the people of the region don't know Iran.
Yeah, no.
And so it made me become an Iran analyst.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. You think about that generation, that's younger than you, and certainly a lot younger than I am. We really didn't get into it as much as I wish we would have in this interview. But they really, I think, have a lot of energy that needs to be channeled into something positive. And when I was in Egypt, I did a lot of work on we probably crossed paths. I don't know. Maybe we saw each other in Cairo at the time. But against the toughest of odds, and I think here in America, it's an unusual time, to say the least. But to see the courage that Egyptians and then now Iranians are displaying, I think is inspirational. What are the things, so that's what got you in, that was the spark. If you were to give advice to somebody in their early 20s who want to follow in your footsteps, what are the things they should be doing? What are the experiences and they should get, the skills they should get?
Well, first, don't listen to your parents.
That's it? Yeah.
Well, if I listened to my parents, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Exactly.
Well, my mom wanted me to be a doctor. My dad wanted me to be a lawyer.
Oh, that's very Persian, isn't it? Yeah, that's, yeah.
And so that, for starters, but I think more importantly...
My mom and dad wanted me to be like an accountant, I think. Like, yeah.
How did they feel about that in the end, and how...
No, in the end, they were super proud. But like, this is the thing about parents, right? Sorry to interrupt, but it's like... they take these kids take on a life of their own, and you
sure.
Yeah. So you weren't a doctor, you weren't, what was the other one?
A lawyer.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah.
But I think more importantly, you have to do what you love, like what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
And I think like my passion for Iran comes out in my work, and I genuinely enjoy reading, writing, speaking about Iran because because I want people to understand the Iran that I knew, like beyond stereotypes and these headlines that are always like death to America or American flags being burned.
Yeah.
That most people have been accustomed to. Like even now we have these parachute journalists that have been in Tehran for the past week. Unfortunately, a lot of it parroting regime propaganda, but honing in on the regime side of things and not the struggles of ordinary Iranians.
Yeah.
And so I try to do as much as I can to amplify their voices.
That's great. I'm glad you do it. I have a passion for writing articles that nobody reads. I was telling my colleague Athena this. I was like, I love like writing this piece that I know only a few people will read. No, but I really have a passion of talking to really super interesting, inspiring people like you. Really smart. And thanks for coming on, taking the edge off the Middle East. This was such a great discussion.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for this week. Again, thank you for our listeners for tuning in, and our colleagues for their work on this week's episode. You can follow MEI on X, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and subscribe to our email newsletters for the latest analysis and information about upcoming events. I'm Brian Katulis. We'll see you all soon.